It seems like investors want to see the optimistic side of this and that hopefully Iran, the US, and by extension Israel are done with the worst of this conflict, at least so far.
Hey, everybody, and welcome to Here's the Scoop from NBC News. I'm Christine Romans, and I'll be filling in for Yasmin Vasugian while she's on assignment in the Middle East. Today on the show, Iran has declared the Strait of Hormuz back open for business, and Wall Street is jumping on the news. But while investors seem to be pricing in an end to the war, will consumers feel any relief? Plus, in this push to the midterm elections in November, Democratic primary challengers are fired up to take on some heavyweight incumbents. What the cash flow is telling us about the possibility for some major upsets. But first, Iran's decision to reopen the Strait of Hormuz comes just hours after a newly brokered ceasefire deal between Israel and Lebanon. President Trump extended his thanks, but affirmed the U.S. blockade of Iran will remain in full force until a final peace deal is brokered. He says those negotiations should, quote, go very quickly. However, the deals have already had an impact on Wall Street. Stocks have rebounded and even propelled to record highs in recent days. On today's news, oil prices plummeted and the Dow jumped 1,000 points. The question is, with Wall Street making a comeback, when will Main Street start to catch up? Joining me now is NBC News business and data correspondent Brian Cheung. Hey, Brian.
Hey, Christine.
Okay, so the Strait of Hormuz is open, but it's still blockaded. But on Wall Street, at least, they're like, okay, we can see the end of a nightmare here, and they're at record highs.
Yeah, it's a fascinating situation where Wall Street isn't waiting to see boats crossing through the Strait of Hormuz en masse before they just start buying stocks again. It seems like that optimism, by the way, has been the story throughout the week, where you have investors going, I think we've gotten to the light at the end of the tunnel here, and rebuying stocks after what was been a really, really bad few weeks. I mean, at some point, Christine, we were down 7% on the year. And as you mentioned, we were hitting record highs this week. And so I think the story is such that investors think we're through this, which is a bet, and it sets themselves up for potentially big drops if this reverses. But it seems like investors want to see the optimistic side of this and that hopefully Iran, the US, and by extension Israel are done with the worst of this conflict, at least so far.
I think it's a reminder, too, that Wall Street represents how well companies are doing, not how well Main Street is doing.
Right.
And companies have figured out over the past couple of years how to take the blow, whether it's tariffs or whether it's a war with Iran.
And take it on the chin.
And take it on the chin and then figure it out and then recover. And that's kind of, I think, what's happening here.
Yeah, and I think that one example is when you look at what's going on with oil markets and gas prices. What you're seeing right now is dropping oil prices as a result of the developments that we've seen. Dramatically. I mean, down over 10% on crude oil.
But still up 25%.
And this is exactly the point, which is that you have the stock markets, which not only reverse the losses for the year, but are now better than we were pre-war. But where oil prices are right now, even despite the drop in crude oil that we've seen as a result of the positive developments this week, are still about $10 to $20, depending on what measure you're looking at, above where we were pre-war. And there's reason to think that that won't change for a while. Not just because of the concerns that maybe this is going to reverse or maybe this won't hold, but because of the structural damage that has been done to the facilities in the Middle East. Getting the capacity to where we were pre-war is going to take several months. That was what Moody's said in a note earlier today. So for that reason, you have oil prices that could translate to lower gas prices at the pump. Gas Buddy was saying today we could see something like $3.30 on a national average by Labor Day. So it's going to take some time. People are going to have to wait until August. But people will note that's still above the $2.98, the sub $3 an average we were getting a gallon prior to the war.
The president's been talking to reporters. He's picking up the phone. He's talking to everybody about like the ins and outs of all of these negotiations. And he said the war with Iran, quote, should be ending pretty soon. We've heard that before, including before the failed U.S.-led peace talks in Islamabad just last weekend. But is Wall Street betting that the war will be over sooner rather than later? Or is Wall Street just happy that the oil could start flowing again?
Well, they're happy about the oil flowing through again. And I think that the bet that you point out is totally an appropriate way to describe this, because let's face it, these Wall Street traders, these investors, they're not experts in geopolitics. They're not in the room. They were not in the room in Islamabad to know what the tone of those conversations were like between the US and Iran. So they are looking at the headlines like we all are and saying, you know what, we have to put our money somewhere. Some people took money out when the markets were falling during the depths of this crisis a few weeks ago, and they're buying again right now. It sets up a situation where if there is a deterioration in the situation, you have conflict resuming again, you have some strikes somewhere, you have key oil producing facilities getting struck again, then you could see dramatic drops again. I think volatility is still the name of the game. Even though markets are above and we've been hitting record highs, the volatility is still the same. Big drops, but also big rises. And for people that don't have a strong stomach, it's very dizzying. The roller coaster is still very much the storyline here.
You still have this big headache because of what happened in the Strait of Hormuz on jet fuel prices and the consumer exposure to higher gas and energy prices. And that doesn't just change overnight. I want to talk about jet fuel. You've got Spirit Airlines that seems to be really in trouble here. It's in bankruptcy. Air Canada just put out a statement that it's temporarily suspending services from Montreal and Toronto to JFK in New York because fuel prices have doubled. You know, why run those routes? And farmers are talking about fertilizer impacts, and that could actually wind up in your grocery bill, not the fertilizer, but the cost of how much more it's going to be. There are lots of different pain points for consumers, even as Wall Street's rallying.
Yeah, and I think that this underscores the point that we haven't seen the full impacts of this on Main Street's bottom line. And that's because there are these lag effects where you think about fertilizer. This happened, the war broke out at the end of February, the beginning of March, and that is when a lot of farmers are trying to get their fertilizer for spring crops like corn, like wheat. And so with the planting season, we might not see those crops even get yielded for another few months. And so if those farmers had to pay higher prices to get that fertilizer a few weeks ago, those prices could be raised or hiked in the months to come. And then that might not hit you at the grocery store until the end of the summer or even in the early part of fall. So there's that impact. And then you think about the airlines that you were just mentioning. The airlines have had their margins really crushed by higher jet fuel costs. You mentioned what's going on with Spirit. There's now a warning from the International Energy Administration that Europe could run out of jet fuel, straight up run out of jet fuel in 6 weeks, which, to be fair, was prior to the announcement from Iran that the Strait of Hormuz had been reopened. But nonetheless, you have these airlines that are thinking about canceling flights. You've already seen major domestic airline carriers raise bag fees. It's hard to imagine a world, Christine, where they go, all right, Strait of Hormuz is open, let's lower those fees. You know, I was talking with one analyst in the middle of this war that was saying, prices are quick to come up. It's hard to see companies, out of the kindness of their hearts, lower them at the end of this.
So much of what we see is the president sets a deadline and he either extends it or he retreats from it, and we have a new deadline. We have a new deadline for the U.S.-Iran ceasefire deal. It's set to expire on Wednesday. And just ahead of President Trump's last deadline, he threatened to wipe out Iran's civilization before agreeing then to a pause. Is there volatility around another deadline here? I mean, anything could happen.
I mean, it's good framing that you put there, right? Only a few weeks ago, we were talking about the president saying he was going to essentially annihilate an entire civilization of people. And now we have essentially peace in the Strait of Hormuz. Every day, every hour, we have no idea what's going on here. That's humanitarian standpoint is paramount here. But from an investor standpoint, people have no idea what's going to happen. And so investors are choosing to put their money somewhere. And the bet is right now that we're out of the woods on this. And you think about what the president has done in the past. This is kind of a resurrection or another take on the taco trade. The Trump always chickens out, that he has set this deadline for negotiation, but he probably will just kick it down the line if we don't have anything finalized. And, you know, maybe we even have something before we get to that deadline. So investors are not they're at least not pricing in the odds that there will be more strikes so that this will pick up. But again, that's a bet. And we have to remember, these are predictions. These are not people inside the room who know what's going on. This is just their bet, and they're hoping they make a lot of money off of it.
And just one last thought, Brian, I think that's so interesting, is Wall Street is like having a party right now. Right. You know, I mean, really is. Record highs for the S&P and the NASDAQ. And everyone else is living through a vibe session. And what do I mean by that? It's not a recession. We're not even close to a recession. The economy's on paper doing fine, but people, their vibes aren't really good. People feel sour about the economy. That's what a vibe session is.
Yeah, and I think that there is a real disconnect on the vibes there. And first off, not everyone's invested in the stock market.
Yep.
So people might not look at their portfolio right now and go, whoa, wait, actually 2026 is really great. I feel good now about it. Most people are just seeing what's going on at the pump where they make that spend every week. They have to go to the gas station every week to fill up their tank. And it is $1 a gallon more to basically get from point A to point B. And so that is the disconnect there. And I think that one other thing that's worth pointing out here is when you talk about what people are feeling, this has already been an extension of what people felt was an affordability crisis before the war in Iran even began. And, to throw another nerd term, the demand destruction, that is where economists worry this is really going to be a problem. Demand destruction would be people choosing not to spend because they feel bad about the economy. People choosing not to buy that house or buy that car or go out to eat. If they're not stimulating the economy because of that demand destruction, what began as a temporary geopolitical issue could turn into a really serious structural problem for the U.S. economic growth.
Brian Cheung, thank you.
Thanks.
Midterms are just around the corner, and new fundraising data from the Federal Election Commission shows that dozens of sitting Democrats are playing defense against primary challengers from within the party. And in many of these districts, these new challengers have pretty deep pockets. They've outraised the incumbents, putting hundreds of thousands of dollars in their war chests already this year. So what does that tell us about the energy within the Democratic Party right now? I'm going to bring in political reporter Bridget Bowman for more on this. Hey, Bridget.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Tell us what these fundraising dollars mean about the energy inside the Democratic Party. And specifically, what do these Democratic challengers, what do they have in common?
Sure. So, yeah, we were really interested when these fundraising reports came out this week. We were interested in this storyline because it's a big storyline of the midterms is the angst within the Democratic Party. There's a lot of dissatisfaction among Democrats with their leaders right now. And one interesting through line through a lot of these races is we do see a generational divide. And we actually saw there were about 9 House Democrats who were actually outraised by their primary challengers in the first fundraising quarter. And that's a really interesting number. You don't see that a lot, where a sitting member of Congress raises less money than their primary challenger. And most of those folks were older members of Congress who are facing younger challengers. So as we saw after 2024 and the Democratic loss in the presidential race and a lot of concerns among Democrats about President Biden, we saw a yearning for a new generation of leadership, and that fight is playing out in real time in a lot of these races.
Yeah, many of those incumbents are 70 or older, right?
That's right. Yeah, most of those folks who are outraised specifically are in that older age bracket, but are still running for re-election. So it's going to be really interesting to see, can some of these primary challengers really catch fire? And raising money is a big piece of that, right? Like, it helps you get your message out. It helps you build turnout operations. It can be a signal to outside groups that you're running a real race, and it can spur some of those outside groups to get involved. So it's going to be, like I said, really interesting to see if we do see more incumbents lose their primaries this cycle. We are seeing more well-funded primary challengers this cycle compared to last cycle as this energy is kind of playing out in the Democratic side.
Are we seeing a parallel on the Republican side, challengers within the Republican Party?
So in terms of primaries, it's a lot less active. So we only saw one House Republican who was outraised by a primary challenger, and that challenger loaned his own money to the campaign. So it's not like the same amount of grassroots energy that's fueling folks on the Democratic side. We did see where we saw the most money flowing to primary challengers on the Republican side are 2 big races that the president is trying to take out an incumbent. So really underscoring how President Trump's loyalty to the president is just such a huge factor in these primaries. We saw, for example, the candidate, Congresswoman running against Bill Cassidy, the senator from Louisiana, Congresswoman Julia Letlow, posted a strong fundraising quarter, outraised him when you're looking campaign to campaign. And we also saw Kentucky Republican Congressman Thomas Massie. His primary challenger didn't raise more than him, but still raised a lot of money. So that's where we really see some of this money flowing on the Republican side.
Bridget, last night in New Jersey, we saw a progressive Democrat win, Analilia Mejia. She won the special election for Governor Mikey Sherrill's seat. So she'll take the rest of that term for the 11th district. When we look at these Democratic challengers, are we seeing a trend toward more progressive candidates?
A little bit. So the primary side, yes, you do often see folks who are a little more to the left, along with the generational divides that we're seeing in primaries. We see an ideological divide as well. But when we look at, like, especially against these incumbents, when we look at races across the map, competitive races for November, you see more of a mix. If it's a redder district, tends to be a more moderate candidate. But one of the interesting things about this New Jersey race is that it really fits the pattern of these special elections that we've seen throughout the president's second term, where Democrats are overperforming what Kamala Harris performed in the 2024 election. This was about, I think, an 11-point swing towards the Democrats, double digits. We've seen that in race after race as these special elections move forward. And to see a progressive candidate like her do well in this maybe a little more moderate district was definitely interesting. It was partly a product of the primary that was very divided, and she was able to come through that.
Does a win like that shape other races, or is it a one-off?
I think it shapes other races in terms of it's another sign of Democratic energy, right? Like, Democrats like to see overperforming the presidential race. But of course, if you talk to folks who work in these campaigns, you'll often hear this phrase where they say special elections are special, that there's a different turnout dynamic in these races. Sometimes there's different money. Republicans weren't really invested in this race at all. So there's a real lopsided investment there. And you're not going to see that in the most competitive House races in November. But again, like, the trend line being what we're seeing in all these races is this Democratic energy. Certainly welcome news for Democrats as they try to take back the House and Senate in November.
I want to ask about the Democratic National Committee's autopsy of 2024, basically their report on how Kamala Harris lost. The DNC has not released that report just yet, but some Democrats are calling for it to be released. Explain the back and forth.
Yes, this is a really interesting kind of microcosm of how divided the party is and how the party is still trying to grapple with what happened in 2024 and how do they move forward. And our colleagues Natasha Krecky and John Allen have some really great reporting. They've talked to about a dozen Democrats who say they want the full results of this autopsy report released. This was something that the DNC chairman, Ken Martin, actually campaigned on when he was running to lead the DNC. He wanted to do a full-scale look at what happened in 2024, what went wrong, how can Democrats fix some of these problems. And they conducted that, but it came out late last year that they actually decided not to release it. Chairman Martin suggested it could be a distraction as Democrats are trying to come together to win in November. But what Natasha and John are reporting, and we're hearing from Democrats, is they want to see the results. They want to know what happened so they can fix it in November, even if it exposes some of the party's divisions, even if it maybe creates some squabbling and back and forth. And it sounds like Chairman Martin is planning to release some of the top lines of those results, but we'll see if that's enough to quiet some of this pressure from fellow Democrats.
You know, we're just about, 200 days until the midterms? Who's counting? But from what you've seen in your reporting, where is the energy right now in the Democratic Party?
It's kind of all over, right? Like, we've done focus groups with Democratic voters, progressives, and moderates. I've talked to a lot of Democratic voters who are in real time trying to figure out some of these competitive primaries. And whether you're a progressive, whether you're a moderate, some of the interesting through lines are they want to win and they want to fight Trump. That's something we hear over and over from folks. And they still are not happy with their own party. We just did a focus groups in voters in Maine and Michigan, Democrats, and all of them had negative things to say about their own party. So they're mad, but they're also energized. So it's really just across the board throughout the party. People are just there's a lot of angst, there's a lot of energy, and they're looking ahead to November.
Bridget Bowman, thank you.
Thanks so much.
That's going to do it for us at Here's the Scoop from NBC News. I'm Christine Romans, filling in for Yasmin Vasugian. We will be back on Monday with Yaz and whatever else the day may bring. If you like what you heard, subscribe. And you can also subscribe to our daily newsletter, The Inside Scoop. It's a deeper dive on the main stories of the day that comes out every weeknight straight to your inbox. You can sign up for The Inside Scoop as part of our paid subscription at NBCnews.com. See ya.
We thank you for watching, and remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.